Welcome to the Joy of Cruising podcast with your host, award-winning author Paul C. Thornton, a weekly conversation with the amazing cruisers featured in the Joy of Cruising books, comprised of The Joy of Cruising, Cruising Interrupted, new release, The Joy of Cruising Again, as well as other fun, informative global cruise personalities. It's the next best thing to cruising, hearing about cruising from the unique and diverse perspectives of Paul's amazing guests. If you hear about a cruise that interests you, book it at www.thejoyoфvacation.com or enter to win a free cruise for two. Again, www.thejoyoфvacation.com. We really appreciate your feedback, so leave us a text. Paul can't reply, but he may read your text on the air.
Hello, passionate cruisers. This is Paul, and this week on the Joy of Cruising podcast, I am delighted to welcome back again to the Joy of Cruising podcast, Mikhail and Dan, creators of the Sometimes Sailing Cruise website and Instagram. Mikhail and Dan are special friends that I got to know when I wrote about Sometimes Sailing in my latest book release, The Joy of Cruising Again, where I wrote about their penchant for small ship cruising as well as ship within a ship spaces. For instance, Celebrity Cruises The Retreat, Norwegian Haven, Princess Cruises Medallion Class, and MSC Yacht Club. With today's episode, Mikhail and Dan, Sometimes Sailing, are the first the Joy of Cruising podcast guests to appear on the podcast 4 times. I hosted Sometimes Sailing on the Joy of Cruising podcast episode 28 in 2023, 101 in 2023, and then again episode 149 in 2024. Welcome back, Mikhail and Dan, to the Joy of Cruising podcast.
We love being here. We're so grateful that you are having us again.
Great to be back.
So how you both doing?
We're good. There's been some cruising that's happened, and holidays in the middle.
Yep, and
strong start to 2025.
It is spring in Florida. It's beautiful. It's the perfect temperature and great weather. And we are thinking of everybody that's going to cruise soon in the Netherlands and see the tulips. So all good, all colorful, all bright and springy. How about you?
I'm fine. Anytime I'm counting down the days for another cruise, I'm walking on air. So I'm down to 12 days.
12 days. What's your next cruise?
Explorer Journeys.
Nice.
We saw on your social you were talking about that and sharing some awesome visuals. Can't wait about that.
So the last time we chatted was before the holidays. I trust you had a happy holiday season and a auspicious start to 2025.
Yeah.
A related and very interesting initiative, so we'll talk about that. But first, we've gained some new listeners who might not be familiar with you, even though you're on the podcast every few months.
I love it.
So share some background info for the listeners. Where you're from, where you live, professional background, anything you would like to share.
Sure. So we are Mikhail and he's Dan from sometimessailing.com. We spread the gospel about small ship cruising in particular and ship within a ship classes on bigger ships like the Retreat on Celebrity or MSC Yacht Club on MSC. We currently live in Orlando, Florida, but we're native New Yorkers. Go Bills. Dan's from Buffalo and I'm from Long Island, though we've lived all over the U.S. And I'm a professional photographer. Dan has had a wonderful professional career in creative direction and marketing and executive coaching. What am I missing?
I think that's it.
Okay.
So I said a little in the intro, say something about your brand, Sometimes Sailing, and you also have an associated brand, Sometimes Home. Give us an overview.
Sometimes Sailing is focused on small ship cruising, and we really love to just bring that information to people. Maybe they haven't sailed on a small ship yet, or else maybe they're seasoned cruisers, but they're looking for something a little bit different. So we touch upon river cruising, yacht cruising, expedition, and then even just a smaller, like Mikhail said, like that small ship within a ship concept on the bigger ships also. Then our other brand is Sometimes Home, and that is focused on couples travel, no kids, no pets. But it's the focus is really split between travel, it's mostly land travel, and then how you prepare your home for that travel. Because now that we're homeowners, there is a whole nother level of complexity that's involved with travel once you have that home and a garden, and you've got to take care of things.
So we have a diverse cruise audience, and I suspect we have a fair amount of people who have never cruised but aspire to cruise. So I always like to ask guests to go way back and talk about how and when they first got into cruising. So say a little bit about that.
My first, well, my first cruise, I believe, was a Disney cruise. And I didn't have a great experience on that because
First big ship.
right, because I get motion sickness. So
Is that the one where Mikhail tried to poison you?
yes,
Correct.
yes.
Now, that's an inside joke, but just for the listeners who don't know about that, say some more before I look like I'm accusing you of being an attempted murderer.
It's the Dateline episode within the podcast here.
Yeah.
So I didn't know I got motion sickness, and then Mikkel came to my rescue. She went down to guest services and got some Dramamine or some sort of motion sickness medication, and I eagerly took it, and the dosage was too much. So I ended up sleeping for about 48 hours of the 3-day cruise.
Yeah. And when it's a 3-day cruise and you're knocked out for a bunch of it, then suddenly when you feel better, the cruise is over. But we learned a valuable lesson.
Yeah.
Bring our own motion sickness medication. And we also, conversely, shortly before that Disney cruise, went on a river cruise with Emerald, which was fantastic. And there is no real motion on river cruises, so he did not get motion sick on that. So we were surprised with the big ship, which in hindsight, of course, they're two totally different cruise experiences. But that was Dan's first cruise, and my first cruises were actually when I interned as a Walt Disney Imagineering intern on the Disney cruise ships way back in 2006. So I was a previous cruiser, but not often, certainly not as often as we cruise now. And together we have built this incredible life we love to create content about small ship cruising.
Now, have you been back on that cruise ship, that Disney cruise ship that Dan slept through?
He's laughing. We have.
So you can to at least experience what you missed.
Yeah. I have been back on. I did experience the ship, and it's a beautiful ship.
We've had several Disney cruises since that. I also photograph weddings, so I have photographed a bunch of weddings on Disney Cruise Line ships, and we most recently got off Disney Fantasy in mid-February before our AmaWaterways experience, which is the most recent one. We got off of that ship at the beginning of March, which was just a few days ago as of this recording.
Mm-hmm.
We take better dosage of the drugs now.
So it's been several months since you were last on, but in that short time, you have gone on several bucket list journeys, as mentioned in the title of this podcast, which is Uncruise Safari Explorer to Hawaii, then the Viking Torgil. Am I saying it right?
Yeah, Viking Torgil.
Torgil or Torgil?
Well, it's really if it was in Norwegian, so we're probably all incorrect, but I would say it's Viking Torgil,
Okay.
like Torgil.
And then
That's it.
AmaWaterways on
Hmm.
the
Yep.
Ama Magna. So,
Yep,
Yes.
and Viking Torgil was on the Douro River in Portugal.
okay, okay. But rather than me trying to pronounce them, just go ahead and tell us about them.
Sure. Well, we can go in the order that we took them.
Yeah, let's do that.
So, starting with Viking Torgil in Portugal, that was an amazing trip. It's a 10-day itinerary, but 1 week of cruising because there is a fantastic pre-cruise trip that's automatically included in this itinerary, which is to say that, in other words, a lot of itineraries you need to add on a pre or post cruise, and this one includes it as part of the experience. So, we spent a couple of days in Lisbon. It's arranged by Viking. We stayed at the beautiful Corinthia Hotel, and we were then bussed up north to Porto with a stop in Coimbra in between, which is the city where there is a gorgeous historic university and associated library.
Mhm.
We were able to do a tour there with everybody and have a fantastic lunch where they had fado musicians and a singer, which is very much like flamenco without the dancer or dancers. And then we embarked on our Viking river cruise ship, which they have a few ships, I believe 5 that sail on the Douro River. They're all identical in architecture, mostly different in name. And that is 106 guests. It is a smaller ship because the Douro River is smaller. You actually sail east from Porto for about 3 or 4 days and then turn the ship around and then you sail back to Porto. So it is a closed jaw itinerary beginning and ending in the same city. So that was Viking Torgil. It was fantastic.
Yeah.
Let me back you up to when you were in Lisbon. How long did you stay in Lisbon?
2 nights with Viking. And we also came in 1 day early on our own so we could experience some other things while we were there.
Yeah.
Hmm. Talk a little bit about Lisbon. I've never been there. One of my best friends, they love it. Talk about it.
For me, it was my first time in Lisbon, and I found it to be a very vibrant city. There was a lot going on and great architecture, kind of like most major European cities. They really celebrate the waterfront. So the I think it was the palace or I can't remember the major thing that was right down on the waterfront, but they really you can tell they embrace the shoreline and watching in the evenings you can go down and watch the ships go
The big ships.
the big ships coming in and out of the port. And then overall just the I thought the architecture was pretty impressive.
It's also a very hilly city, which I think would surprise most people. It kind of reminded us of San Francisco in that way. The only interesting thing about that is that most of the sidewalks are covered in a very slick stone. So,
Yeah, the cobblestones are limestone there, so it's pretty common to watch people fall.
yeah. So, if you think you have mobility challenges and you might need a cane somewhere, don't be shy. Bring it here. We were wearing sneakers and flat-soled shoes, and we didn't see anyone in heels, not even locals, until one night we saw like 4 women coming out of an apartment only to enter a car. They weren't walking anywhere because I can't imagine how people walk on that otherwise. So that's surprising, and that's not to deter anyone from visiting. It's a beautiful city. It's just to say go prepared. The food is great. The cost of things in Portugal is very affordable.
Yeah.
And Lisbon has an abundance of culinary experiences, art performances. You know, we were saying about fado music before, and plenty of day trips and tours. We did a trip to Sintra, which is famous for Pina Palace. It's very colorful. It's definitely a standout and something you'll see advertised as tours from Lisbon. It's probably the #1 tourist day trip from Lisbon. There's also Cascais, which is a very ritzy area of the greater metropolitan area of Lisbon. And it's where a lot of stars, including soccer stars or football stars, as they'd say, have their homes. And you can visit the city center and shop and dine. And as Dan said, enjoy the waterfront there.
Okay, okay. So there you go, listeners. For those of you who are considering itineraries that include Portugal, include Lisbon, that's a little bit insight for you. So then you boarded Viking Torgil. Now, I have only been on one river cruise, and it was AmaWaterways, thanks largely to you. So for me, and for the listeners, contrast a Viking river cruise to the only thing I know, AmaWaterways.
Sure, I love that. And your question is very common amongst river cruisers. We get asked that a lot, and we see that question a lot.
I would say the biggest thing that stands out for me in between Viking and Ama is I think in my experience the food on Ama has been fantastic and Viking a little less, but Viking also has I like the kind of Scandinavian feel of the ships.
Interesting.
They're very like streamlined, a very kind of simple design, and I like that. Where Ama seems to be a little bit more
ornate.
Ornate, yeah, I think is a good way to put it.
Yeah.
So the interiors of the ships, that's where I go with the differences.
Yeah, I think also from a pricing standpoint, Viking might have more promotions and be a little more affordable. But in comparing what you get, AmaWaterways includes more options for their excursions. So Viking guarantees one included excursion for every port, and Ama might have 3 options to Viking's 1 option that don't cost additional. Actually, now that I say the word option out loud, Viking says that they have optional excursions, and that's actually the terminology they use to indicate that there's an additional cost. I think their terminology is a little confusing, so saying it's an option is confusing, but that's how they indicate it's an option to add it on. Another thing about Viking versus AmaWaterways in our experience, having sailed on both several times, is that the owners of AmaWaterways, who actually started in river cruising working for Viking, are so visible, and we've sailed with them. There were other guests on that sailing. It's not so uncommon to see them and understand how much they care about AmaWaterways and the brand and what they've built, and kind of leaving this legacy in river cruising for hundreds of thousands of people to enjoy. So we really appreciate that, because it also trickles down to their crew and the land-based tour operators and businesses that they decide to support.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What about passenger load? Similar?
It depends on the ship. I would say most river cruise lines, if you're comparing the river that the ship is on, are very similar, if not almost identical in the guest capacity. Guest capacity on the Douro River is about 106 guests, and something like a river cruise on the Danube might be closer to 180 guests on Viking's long ships, which is similar to Ama Christina or Ama Viola. I think you went on Ama Viola.
No, I went on Ama Christina.
Oh, you were on
Christina.
Oh, you know what?
So it was 156 guests.
Okay. So it's very specific to the river. The exception is in the case of Ama Magna that we were just on, because it's a double wide ship, and the double wide ship accommodates some more cabins. The interesting thing about that is that AmaWaterways made the decision with the extra space to make the cabins bigger, not necessarily to jam in all the guests that they can, which is really nice. So the kind of square footage to passenger ratio is awesome because there's just so many more spaces and more lounges, and the pool also has a hot tub, and there is a pickleball court on top.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's really cool. So size-wise, it really depends on the river, independent of what cruise line it is. But the exception would be if it's a double wide cruise ship, which AmaWaterways has and Riverside Luxury Cruises has.
That now, does the Torgil, does it have what's on the top deck? Is there a pool and is it similar to Ama?
No, although we did pass by an AmaWaterways ship on the Douro. We didn't go on it on that river, but the Viking Torgil ship, which is identical to the 4 other ships on that river, there are 5 total, does not have a pool on the top deck. Actually, I can't think of a Viking ship that does have a pool.
Okay.
Yeah.
So to your point, Paul, Ama versus Viking, if you want more amenities on board, Ama Christina has a pool as well. That is a really nice thing, especially if you're sailing during the summer. And we just sailed on Ama Magna during the winter, but we were pleasantly surprised the pool was heated, which we weren't expecting.
Right.
And the hot tub had steam coming off when it hit the cold air. So that was kind of cool. But the Viking Torgil does not have a pool on it.
Okay. Anything else about tour? What was your? You probably said it and I missed it. What was your itinerary? After Lisbon, after you got on board?
So we started in Porto, which is a city on the west coast by the water, by the Atlantic Ocean, which is where the Douro River is flowing to. And we sailed east from Porto on the Douro River and then stopped very close to Spain. One of the excursions that we enjoyed one day was a day trip to Salamanca, Spain, which was about a 2-hour drive from the port we were in Portugal. And then when we got on the ship, we headed back west to end in Porto. And one of the amazing things about this itinerary and why a lot of people go is because the Douro River is so beautiful. It is like, if you've ever been through, you or anyone listening, the Wachau Valley in Austria, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Landscape, it is that times 10. There's just these gorgeous rolling hills covered with vineyards.
Yeah.
And we were on the last sailing of the year in November. And it was a really interesting time to be there because the thing that we had that people that perhaps went during the summer didn't have was the gorgeous autumn colors on the vineyards. So the leaves were certainly not as plentiful as they probably were 4 weeks before, but the vineyard leaves were kind of, I would say, like flirting with us in a way with Mother Nature with the oranges and reds. It was really stunning.
Yeah.
I know for me and many, if not most of the passengers on AmaWaterways, it was their first river cruise. And one fascination that everybody seemed to talk about was the lock system. I assume that you had the same thing on the Douro, and if so, talk a little bit about that because I suspect a fair amount of my listeners have not been on a river cruise, and for me to say that was like a fascination highlight, they want to hear more. So talk about the lock system on Douro.
The locks in general, it's so interesting because you just pull in and you come to a complete stop and then you just wait. And it's literally like a liquid elevator of sorts, right? Like it's like you're on the water and then you're in a big box and it either the water level either goes up or goes down and sometimes you're in there with other ships, but more often than not you're in by yourself. And it takes a good, half an hour, 45 minutes for the lock to do its thing. And then the doors open and you go out. But you have that kind of that surreal moment if you're not realizing what's happening and maybe you're in your cabin and you open your blinds and there's just a concrete wall that you're staring at. You're like, what is happening and where did the sun go? those moments, it truly is a surreal moment where you're like, I have never experienced anything like this, and what is happening? But it's completely safe and very slow. It's a slow process, but
It's cool.
it's an experience.
And the Douro River did have a couple of locks, and it very much, whether the guests realize it or not, or the captain shares it or not, or any of the crew that you're talking to that's kind of, deckhanding, so to speak, there's a very specific time that they need to be in there because all the ships need to get through and pass certain points of the river. So there were very specific times, especially on the Douro River, that the ship had to be in the locks to get through to the next point. And this conversation has reminded me that I am not particularly a morning person. However, on the Douro River cruise, we made a point to set our alarms for 6 a.m. to get up on the top deck because the landscape was just so beautiful that the sunrise made it even more stunning. And that was certainly worth getting up to witness.
If I remember correctly, they weren't allowed to sail or they weren't allowed to cruise at night.
Good point. That is something unique to the Douro River.
So they had to. We would get up early just to catch some of that some of the sailing as it was happening, and we always docked at night.
Yeah, whereas conversely in Europe on other rivers such as the Rhone or Moselle or the Rhine or the Danube, you can sail at night. The reason you can't sail at night on the Douro River is because it is a narrow river and it is hard to navigate in some areas. So our guests and through conversations with the crew and the captain, they want the visibility of daylight.
Well, I did learn something today. I did not know that you could have more than one ship in a lock.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
It depends on the lock, like Dan said. It depends on the lock. It was really cool when we were on barge cruises, which is a really small ship. We were 2 of 5 passengers on that experience, but they kind of load up the lock in some of those areas on the canals, like they're fitting a bunch of rubber duckies in a bathtub. And they'll load it up with maybe 6 boats, and then everyone goes through the lock at the same time, and then kind of like a ferry opening the doors for the cars to get off. It's very similar when they open the gates and all the boats keep moving down the canal.
Wow. When were you on a barge cruise?
We were on a barge cruise in, I want to say 2022. We were on the ship Anjodi, it's called Anjodi in France on Canal du Midi, Midi. It was very cool.
And we were cruising with European Waterways on that one.
Yeah, I'm kind of fascinated about barge cruising, and I didn't realize that you've been on a barge cruise. So, next time you're on, and there will be a next time.
I love that. Of course, we hope so.
We'll set aside, some of the discussion to walk us through, if you will, us through the barge cruise experience, because that's something some of my listeners are probably saying, barge cruise, what is he talking about? Others, I'm sure, have heard of it, and like me, are just fascinated by it. So on another podcast, we'll get you to even though it's back a couple of years, we'll get you to take us through that experience.
Yeah, it's still very fresh in our minds, and that's what we love doing, spreading the small ship cruise options to people, especially your listeners. So that would bring us great joy.
There you go. We might title it, "What is Barge Cruising?" or something like that. So that you can what's the word? Proselytize. You can. That's something you can push.
Exactly.
Okay, so talk about your next adventure over the holidays.
So right before the Christmas holiday, we went on Uncruise Safari Explorer in Hawaii. Expedition cruise, very small. There was 36
capacity of 36, but there were only 18 of us on this particular sailing. The next week when we got off and the next sailing got on was full at capacity.
Right. And talk about, it was all about the adventure and it was all about really connecting with nature. So we did a lot of snorkeling, a lot of hiking. There was at one point they just put out
The
like
toys.
water toys, like so
Noodles.
we were jumping off the back deck and had stand-up paddle boards and noodles and things in the water. It was really about connecting to Hawaii and the natural landscape and being part of the ecosystem while we were there.
Mm-hmm.
Our our naturalist and guide on board were phenomenal and really just gave us a lot of that inside information that brought the entire experience to life.
Mm-hmm. So kind of a similar question to what I asked earlier, comparing Viking to Ama. Compare an expedition ship to a river cruise ship.
Ooh, night and day.
Yeah, it's very different.
Really?
Yeah, night and day.
Because your expedition ships, it's really all about getting involved with the water and the landscape and learning as you go. So most of your expedition cruises have a naturalist on board, and he or she is going to teach as you go through. So talking about the ports that we're going to visit or the adventures that we're going to have the next day. And then also the wildlife that's there and the conservation efforts that are happening. So it's much more of a conversation around just the environment that you are cruising through. Whereas on a river cruise, yes, they do give you some history and there are some very informational things and some cruise lines do such a great job at linking culture and giving you that information about the ports or the cathedrals that you're about to visit. But I feel like on an expedition cruise, it's
really
times
immersive in a
that.
different
Yeah.
It's immersive in a different way. And the ship itself is a little more rugged, I want to say.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it.
Because the capacity is so much smaller on most of these expedition ships. Not all. Scenic has the Eclipse 1 and Eclipse 2 that are, many more passengers than 36, and it's a very much a luxurious ship. Uncruise or Alaskan Dream Cruises, for example, are very comparable. They are American owned, and because of that, the crew is very much American, and a lot of the people on our Uncruise ship actually were residents in Hawaii. They didn't grow up there, but they lived there, which was really fun because they could give us some local recommendations. The commonality, I would say, is that they start and end very much in the country and very locally. So for Uncruise, we started on the island of Molokai and went to the Big Island. It also does the reverse trip. And just for purposes of this conversation, for the Viking Torgil, we started and ended in Portugal. So as opposed to something like Alaska that maybe you're starting in Seattle, which obviously is not in Alaska and you're cruising to Alaska. But Alaskan Dream Cruises, going back to the expedition ship experience, starts and ends in Alaska. So Uncruise, the ship was great. It was actually a lot nicer than we expected. We had heard from other passengers that are Uncruise repeat offenders and loyalists that they thought it was one of the nicest ships that they had. The food was phenomenal. I would say in the top 3 cruises we've been on, we were blown away by the food. It was so good. And they used local things to Hawaii. One excursion, our cruise director, you could call him, that's not his official name, but our guru, our guide, our everything on this trip, Sam the man, he called himself. Sam was picking star fruit off of this guy's garden and orchard, I guess you could say, with permission, of course. They're friends from Uncruise going here all the time and doing a cultural Hawaiian experience there. But, the star fruit showed up on the bar menu because our bartender, CJ, was able to infuse gin with the star fruit. I mean, it was amazing. It was really amazing. There was such a great community feel. That's kind of at a different level than the river cruises because there's only 36 or less passengers on it. And in our case, there were 18. So it's really, you're on the water, but again, you're on the ocean and you're on open water. The expedition ships are not going on the rivers. So it's very different in that way as well.
Mm-hmm.
So no such thing as locks then?
No locks.
Nope, no locks. But there are whales, and there were whales during this trip, and we were able to go in the skiffs that are, the smaller boats to kind of go out into groups and explore and go whale watching and try to find, like Dan said, the different wildlife and learn about it really just really up close and personal. We snorkeled, as he said. One of the standout moments for me was kind of befriending the sea turtle. You have to keep a safe distance, of course, and be respectful, but we were as close as could be, and I'd never experienced something like that before, and I felt like we were talking to each other. It sounds crazy and a little cuckoo to say, but we were just like in sync. We were picking our heads up above the water because turtles need to come up to breathe, and below, and it was just such a magical moment. And I truly thank Uncruise for that.
Yeah.
So you were wowed by the food. Say a little bit about accommodation.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm. Probably the thing that surprised us a little bit about our room was we had two separate beds.
Yeah.
And for me, I'm a tall guy. I'm above 6 feet, so I sort of had the little diagonal bed sleeping, just the way the configuration was.
Yeah.
But the room was pretty spacious.
It was great.
I would say, and private bathroom within the room. And the other piece that's interesting on a expedition ships and some ships is your door to your cabin enters right out onto the deck. So not on the side.
That's interesting.
Right.
Almost like a motel.
Right. Yeah. So it's like you just slide the door open and then you go in, but then there's people walking by your cabin throughout the day and throughout the night.
And the trust factor is there too, because on a river cruise ship, obviously your door locks, you need a key to get in, and there's no lock. There's physically a lock, but there's no key for that lock on the door. And that's common on any expedition ship we've ever been on. And there's just a layer of trust. I mean, everyone has a camera or valuables or valuable binoculars they bring with them, and you're all on the same trip. So you just have an immediate level of trust, and the doors are fine. And actually, one of our best performing reels on Instagram, if you go to Instagram, it's currently pinned to the top of our feed at Sometimes Sailing, is a reel that says, "This is shocking." And I think it performs so well because it is shocking that the door doesn't lock, but we kind of explain, as we just did to everybody listening, that there's just no need to have a lock on the door.
Now, and forgive me if this is a dumb question, but is there a bathroom in the room, or is it a communal bathroom situation?
No. Yeah. Each cabin has its own bathroom.
That is not a dumb question. That's a great question, because something like Maine Windjammer, we had a toilet and a little sink. Did we have a toilet in the room? Gosh,
No.
It was so long ago.
No,
we did not. We have a little
sink
sink
in the room, but
there
then
were
a
two toilets outside.
community toilet
And a communal shower. So it's not a dumb question. I'm glad you asked, because it is a highlight of Uncruise. Everybody has their own bathroom, their own shower, their own toilet, their own sink, and even the wood finishes in our room were really pretty. And there are rooms that do have queen beds in them. We just didn't have one of them because there's a limited amount. So we were in a room that had two separate beds. The funny thing is, Dan's tall, I'm short, and we realized halfway through the cruise that if we had just switched the beds we were in, his feet would have been able to hang over because of the way the room was configured. But at that point, I think we were committed to our beds, so we didn't switch. For sure.
Developed a relationship with your bed. Now another question, and forgive me, I just don't know. What about balconies? Do you have a balcony?
You don't. It's kind of like the whole ship is your balcony.
Yeah. As soon as you walk out of your room, you're on deck.
Okay. Okay.
It's
And
like an exterior hallway.
and then the meals you had like a dining room.
Yeah, it's just like on a river cruise. You have a community dining room
Yeah.
with a bar attached, and
Just picture it a fraction of the size.
yeah,
And then a lounge
yeah,
was also in that space. So it was kind of like deck two, which is the deck we entered on, I believe. Was
yes,
it deck two or deck one? No, I think it was deck one. Deck one was the restaurant and the lounge, and then the bar. And that's where we would have some meetings about the excursions or how the next day was going to work. And then deck two was mostly all the cabins. And deck three was the top deck that had a hot tub. But funny enough, the hot tub is not in use for the Hawaii cruises. They use it in the Alaska sailings that the same ship does because the swimming arena is very much the ocean for this. And they don't let you go in the water if it's unsafe, if the tides are too strong, if the swells are too big, if there's sharks in the area. The crew was amazing. They wore neon yellow long sleeve rash guards. They were very visible at all times. So if you're not comfortable swimming and you wanted to go in, they were always there. I shared with them that I'm not the greatest swimmer and, I love snorkeling, but, maybe check on me a little the first time we went out, and they were awesome about it. They're just so sweet and they were so accommodating. And you can take all the flotation devices you wanted. Like Dan said, they had some fun toys. I will post a video soon of me wearing a pink flamingo floaty that was adorable and very cute. And then another side note, small thing that they had on the ship that we very much appreciated was that they have a little device that kind of you put your swimsuit in there for 8 seconds and it spins it really fast, almost like a salad spinner, or truly your washing machine when it's going through the dry cycle or as dry as it gets in the wet washer. It spins the water out of your swimsuit. So at least you feel like, your swimsuit is going to dry between snorkels.
Oh, that sounds like something that should be included on all ships.
Now that you say that, you're 100% correct.
Yeah. Well, for the listeners, as you can tell, I'm quite intrigued by expedition cruising, and we have tentatively Uncruise scheduled for the podcast in June. So,
nice.
Oh yes, I'm so happy for you. That's amazing. We can't wait to listen to that.
okay, and then there was the AmaMagna.
Yeah, she's a big girl.
She's a big, beautiful girl.
So
Now, you said the rooms were larger, so the capacity didn't increase according to the size of the ship, right? What was the capacity on the? By the way, listeners, maybe I didn't say it, or Michaela and Dan will say it. This is your double wide river cruiser, so,
Exactly.
Yep.
or river cruise vessel.
Yes.
So what was the capacity on that? And then explain to the listeners what is meant calling it a double wide. Because some of them
Sure.
that if they've had, especially if you haven't gone on a river cruise, that might be a meaningless concept.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the capacity was 196 passengers, and it increased slightly from a single wide. So to address that, let's say a single wide cruise ship is 38 feet in width.
Yep.
A single wide ship is 38 feet typically on the Danube River, but AmaMagna was 72 feet in width. So I kind of equate it to a trailer. You can have one trailer or a double wide trailer that's almost, not quite, but almost double the width. And that's what AmaMagna was. And they might have 180 passengers on a single wide, and 196 is only an increase of 16 passengers. So they made the rooms bigger and there are more suite categories. So we had an incredibly spacious room, and there were various layouts and suites that you could choose from. I believe there was 6 or something. There was a lot.
5 or 6, yeah.
Yeah, they have their deck plan available on their website. AmaWaterways.com. You can look up any ship just like you can do on Viking or Emerald or, et cetera. But the Ama Magna was great, and we loved the increase in amenities. They also had a really big fitness room. They had several cycling bikes. They had 6, so they could have 5 students, so to speak, and 1 instructor. That was really amazing. People loved the pickleball court. Even in late winter, people, brought their rackets to play.
What were some of the, well, obviously pickleball, what were some of the other amenities that a double wide river cruise vessel enables them to have? Just everything is bigger?
The thing that stands out for me on the Ama Magna was they had a cinema
Yes.
in the front with a large television that you could just put whatever you wanted on and watch it as with probably 20 of your closest friends. But it wasn't like theater seating. It was kind of like bench seating around the TV.
Perimeter.
And then on either side of that were 2 libraries. And then you also had the lounge and bar. So it was really interesting because you could find a space to call your own. Like I worked in one of the libraries for a couple hours one day and didn't see another person the whole time I was sitting there. Where what they did is instead of just packing it with cabins, they really utilized the space to give everybody their own space on the ship.
Yeah. So everybody had more room, and the center of the upper lounge, they called it, was this dance floor. We had great evenings in there dancing with the other passengers, and they had a musician, a pianist, and actually his fiance, who was an amazing singer. Anna and Richard were the evening entertainment every night. And there were also an increase of restaurants. So not only did this AmaWaterways ship have the main dining area, and they had the chef's table, which AmaWaterways is famous for. Everyone on the ship can dine there at least once during the cruise. The menu's the same every night. So even if you dine there 2 times, the menu's going to be the same. But they also had 2 other restaurants, and that was really nice. One was called Jimmy's, and that's named after Jimmy Murphy, who was the 3rd co-founder of AmaWaterways that unfortunately passed away years ago. So that was in his honor, and it had some green tones in the interior design to honor his Irish heritage. And it had some great old photographs of him and his family, black and whites of even his wedding decades ago. So that was really fun. And that everything there is served family style. And then we also ate at Al Fresco, which is almost like the Aquavat Terrace on Viking ships in the front of the ship with the Florida ceiling glass windows. That is multi-purpose. So in the morning, it's another location for breakfast, and they had everything for breakfast that the other restaurant had, or you could eat there for lunch, and they have almost everything that the main dining has for lunch. And then for dinner, it was a Mediterranean-inspired restaurant with a multi-course set menu that was phenomenal.
Yeah, that sounds, I absolutely loved my one visit on a river cruise, and double wide seems like that's something related but new. I need to put on my well. Let me just check that. I mean, what can I expect to get out of a double wide experience that I can't get from the single wide?
Probably the biggest thing that jumps to mind is just your choice in dining. On your single wides, you've got the main dining room and maybe a chef's table, depending on the line. But having multiple dining options, and then also for me, the biggest thing was the gym. The gym was huge, and there's been sometimes I've worked out and it's like I'm scraping my head on the ceiling, or else my elbows are hitting the side of the ship as I'm lifting. So this ship had quite the gym, and there was plenty of room for multiple people to work out.
Yeah, and I think
also the larger cabin.
The larger cabins were amazing. Yeah. And another thing that was pretty cool was when we were sailing past Parliament in Budapest, which is a very famous landscape to see, especially the best view is from the river. It didn't feel like everybody was cramped for one area on the top deck because it was so wide. There's more seating, more tables, more room. Nobody was near us towards the back of the ship when you and I were making some videos and taking photographs.
Yeah.
It was awesome. So you truly get the luxury of space on AmaMagna.
Yeah.
Now here's another one of those naive questions. Talk about locks. Do double wides
Sure.
deal with locks?
Yeah, so they do.
My recollection of the locks, I mean, our first time we went through one, we were, I guess, in the dining room. Everything got dark. You know, it was light outside. Everything got dark, and
Right.
like you said, we looked out the window and we saw concrete walls, and it didn't look wide enough for the way you describe a double wide.
There's two double wides, and they're both on the Danube, and so they've been built specifically to make sure that they fit in all the locks.
In all the locks within a certain stretch of the river.
Correct.
The double wides cannot go the entire length of the Danube River. Now, most river cruises do not sail the entire length of the Danube, even if they're single. You might start in Amsterdam and end in Budapest. You might go from Budapest to Bucharest. But most river cruises, especially if they're 7 days, are only sailing a portion of the river. So something to keep in mind with AmaMagna is that it can only sail a certain length. And we're not 100% sure if it's because of the size of some of the locks in other areas or because of the width of the river, but we suspect it is for both reasons. But that's a great point about AmaMagna.
Now, you mentioned Budapest. What was your itinerary?
Very interesting one.
Budapest to Budapest.
Yep.
We went, we started in Budapest, then we went to
Bratislava.
In
Slovakia.
Then
we went to Linz in Austria. You could go to Milk Abbey, which we stayed on the ship that day because we had been there before, which I'll come back to in a minute. We did a day trip to Salzburg, which is famous as the birthplace of Mozart, and also a few scenes from The Sound of Music were filmed there. We went to Vienna. Yeah. And one of the nice things for us about this river cruise was that it went to some cities we had been to in the past. So it was actually the first time that we stayed on the ship when a lot of people got off the ship, which was even more luxurious for us because most of the people that stayed on board, it was only a handful of people and they were in their rooms. So we kind of felt like we had this huge ship to ourselves. And that was a really cool, neat, new experience. So I would tell people, don't be discouraged from taking an itinerary that has cities you've been to in the past, because if you are on a river cruise and you love river cruising, it simply allows you to be on the ship a little more, especially when everybody else is off.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there was one other major development since the last time I talked to Mikhail and Dan. Talk about the newborn idea.
We are so excited to have Small Ship Cruise Talk coming out as we record this tomorrow, but when your listeners are hearing it, it will have already premiered and be out. Paul, you are so inspiring, as well as our friends at DCL Duo who introduced us to you, which we are so grateful for. And we absolutely love listening to everybody's cruise content. And we, like we said, are so passionate about small ship cruising that we wanted to hop on the podcasting train. We've been wanting to do it for years, but the stars aligned for it to happen in 2025. And specifically talk about small ship cruise experiences and our firsthand experience. We can't wait to have you on as a guest and other guests and other experts in the area of small ship cruising to specifically talk about these smaller itineraries and vacation experiences. Thank you for asking.
Now, will this be audio only or video podcast?
So the truth is, we also have video associated, but we're going to take baby steps. We're going to walk before we can run. Audio for sure, first and foremost, but we are going to try to upload as best we can on our YouTube channel that we have been building up. And another great thing in the works is our River Cruise workshop, which last time we offered we offered your listeners a freebie if they signed up for our River Cruise budgeting PDF, which we would love to extend that again because we're so grateful to everybody listening and to you. So we'll be sure to give you that link to include in the show notes so they can get that PDF to budget for their own river cruises so they too can say, one day, I remember my first river cruise.
And what's the frequency of the episodes?
So the frequency is at least every week. And as far as length,
About 25 minutes.
yeah.
So it's easily digestible.
Yep. So if they want to binge a few at a time, they can. If they want to listen to half, if they only have 10 minutes, they'll be able to do that. So weekly and 20 to 30 minutes, 20, 25, 30. It depends on the episode.
So again, tell the listeners how to access it, and also tell the listeners how to follow you on social media in general.
Sure. So our website is sometimessailing.com, SOMETIMES sailing.com. And our podcast can also be found on there. We'll include that direct link in the show notes, but we're also going to be on Buzzsprout, which I know Joy of Cruising podcast is also on Buzzsprout, and it pushes out to all the major podcast software platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, things like that. And we are on Instagram the most. We are on TikTok sometimes, sometimes on TikTok. And we love writing articles and sharing great information with our newsletter subscribers as well. Dan, am I missing anything?
No, I think you got it.
Yeah, we're on Threads sometimes too, but Instagram's our main one at the moment.
Great. Well, best wishes with your new endeavor, and I certainly will be tuning in.
Thank you.
And I hope that you've obtained some listeners, today. And like I said, like you said, we'll make sure that we put all of the right links in the show notes. Let's talk about the future. What do you have booked?
Ooh, good question.
What do we have booked?
So we are going on the MSC World America premiere sailing that is very much aimed at media and content creators in the second week of April. So we are looking forward to that. It is a 2-nighter, nearly 3 days that goes to the Caribbean, including MSC Marine Reserve, their private island. We are excited for that. And we are also going on a American Cruise Lines river cruise.
That will be on the Snake and Columbia River starting in July, I believe.
Close. It ends close to July. So we're going to go
ending in July.
In June. And that, as Dan said, is on the Columbia and Snake Rivers in the Pacific Northwest.
Anything else?
That's all we have right now. We're looking at a few things. We definitely want to go back to Europe this summer or late summer / early fall. We actually haven't been to Europe during that time in 2 years, which is a lot for us. We don't have kids or pets for everybody listening, so we're a little more flexible than the average bear. But we're looking forward to that. Things come up and we love to be able to sometimes be a little spontaneous about it. So we also, as Dan said, we bought a house a year ago, so we've got a lot of house projects we're working on.
So is there, what remains on your bucket list?
Oh gosh, good question.
Yeah. For me, I really wanted to sail the Mekong. We did that last year. So that was an amazing, amazing journey. But I still have Patagonia on my list. I want to get there.
So Patagonia in South America for everybody listening. And we we could piggyback that with a cruise, and I'm not sure why we wouldn't as cruise lovers. And we really love pairing land and sea, which we typically do on our own beforehand and after, or sometimes with the cruise line. But for me, Douro River was a bucket list trip for me, but I would love, love, love to sail in Norway.
Mhm.
We are currently exploring some options to do the fjords on smaller ships. We've been to Norway a few times by land. And then another major bucket list trip for me would be cruising Japan. I am obsessed with Japan. I've been several times by land. Dan and I had an incredible 6 weeks there when we went in 2023, and doing it by sea would be an incredible different experience for us. And of course, we would extend before and after to be there as long as possible, which, hint, hint, for anybody listening, you can be there for 90 days without a visa, which could change at any time. But, last we checked, that was the allowance.
Okay. Before we let you go, as you know, we always like to close with some light questions, even fun questions. But let me preface by saying welcome to the many sometimes sailing fans and friends who are listening, and so that your friends and fans can get to know you a little bit better. Let me ask a few questions I like to ask repeat guests. Tell our listeners and your friends, how do you spend? Well, I know the answer to this question because you just bought a house. I was gonna say, how do you spend your me time? And the answer is house. But no, you go ahead and answer.
House, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we have some other things we do.
There's been a giant learning curve of how to use power tools and how to DIY our own things
DIY
within the house. So the garden takes up a lot of time, but for me, like my time, I enjoy meditating and reading. That's really where I recharge.
And I love cooking, and gardening is major. And recently, to go along with the house, cabinet making.
Dan, have you put together a little meditation area?
I have, yeah, right here in my office. I've got the cushion on the floor, and that's my spot.
Next question. So, what are you guys listening to right now in terms of podcasts, audio books? Turn our listeners on.
Mm-hmm.
Well, first and foremost is your podcast. We
Well, of
always
course.
download every episode and make sure that that's on our repeat for weekly listens. So we like travel podcasts in general, but of course we each have our own things we listen to as well. So I am currently reading a hard copy book of Mel Robbins. She is kind of an inspirational, motivational speaker. Her book called Let Them.
And I have been listening to the audio book of 10x is Easier Than 2x by Dan Sullivan and Benjamin Hardy.
You can tell we like a lot of self-help books and self-improvement and business books, actually.
A lot of growth.
Growth. We believe in growth.
How about television and movies? Anything to turn my listeners on to?
I'm glad you're bringing this up because I keep forgetting to tell you, Dan, that we need to tune into White Lotus season 3. We watched season 1 and 2, but we haven't watched season 3 yet together. So I'm glad we're all talking about this as a family.
So, White Lotus. I've heard a lot about it.
Yeah.
I rarely watch television. Just don't have the time. But is that something I should try?
I don't know. I'm trying to think what I would recommend if somebody really had the time. It's funny. Dan actually rarely watches TV too, but we'll pick a show and then slowly watch it over the course of several weeks, 1 or 2 nights a week together as kind of wind down time and something to do as a couple. I would say season 1 of White Lotus was outstanding. Season 2 was good. TBD on season 3.
Mm-hmm. And recently I've jumped back into Anthony Bourdain's No Reservations, like the old stuff, and it's just it's fun. It's a little raw. It seems amateurish, but yet exciting. So yeah, especially like if like I watched the Vienna episode after being in Vienna, so it was like,
That's
okay,
fun.
connecting some dots,
Oh, okay. Yep. Okay. Hey, let's have a little fun, or it could be a little disaster. So, in a recent episode, it was totally unplanned. A guest turned the table on me and asked me a couple of rapid fire questions that I was not prepared for. So that's why I said it could be a disaster, but it wasn't a disaster. It turned out to be a lot of fun. And so I'm going to incorporate it into my podcast for repeat guests like yourself. By the way, credit to Craig of Laura and Craig's Cruise Lifestyle for coming up with this idea. A rapid fire style, ask away. 2 or 3 questions you have for me.
Okay, Dan's got one ready to tee.
All right, Paul, do you get seasick?
Absolutely not. Never. My wife does.
Cheryl does.
And-
Okay,
and-
so
and-
you're also a house divided.
And not only that, but she has vertigo.
Ooh.
So she doesn't get terribly seasick. I would say maybe 1 out of every 4 cruises.
Oh, okay.
But she's very sensitive to. I mean, she'll tell me, do you feel the ship moving? She's not necessarily sick, but she's very cognizant of when the ship is moving.
Yeah.
And I'll sometimes say, "No, I don't feel anything." when I actually do.
So does she wear motion sickness patches or anything?
No, it's really not that bad.
Okay.
So I've never seen her wear a patch or take any medication.
Oh,
Okay.
okay. All right.
Interesting. All right, it's my turn.
Yep.
I hope this is okay to ask. You've recently gone into the world of being travel advisors. So how has that changed your perspective on being cruisers?
It hasn't been much of a change. So I've now, I just added another piece to my portfolio. I'm a travel writer, I'm a cruise podcaster, and I'm a travel advisor. It's just,
I
Yeah.
love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess the question I have is when you get on board a cruise, what's the first thing you do?
order a Miami Vice.
Oh,
Nice.
I love it. I was not expecting you to say that.
Now this cruise I'm going on going on before this episode airs. That's Explorer Journeys. I don't know how much you looked at any videos or anything about Explorer Journeys, but as soon as I get on that cruise, I'm going to the buffet. But they call it, it's what they call a buffet would be equivalent to a specialty restaurant on most other cruises. They grill lobster, they have raw oyster. It's buffet is kind of, that's not a fair descriptor of what they are. So that's probably going to be the first thing I do is go to the it's called the Emporium. And you actually don't even have to, go up to the buffet. You can just go to a table and tell somebody what you want, and they'll go get it. But I hear it's so inviting just looking at the offerings. I can't wait to see that. But yeah, generally the first thing is order my traditional cruise drink.
You've been on a river cruise. You've been on an ocean ship. Is there another form of cruising that you have yet to try but would like to in the next 5 years?
Well, I'm intrigued about barge cruising, and I don't know yet that I want to go on one, but I want to learn more about it. Expedition cruising, on the other hand, it sounds like that's for very adventurous, active individuals.
A little more active, yeah.
And these days, excuse my bad grammar, that ain't me.
Hey, you gotta know thyself.
Well, Mikhail and Dan, it has been great catching up. I said in the intro, you're my first 4-time guest. I am reasonably certain you will become my first fifth time guest.
We got to keep winning that race.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
we're staying
so-
in the front.
You do so much bucket list cruising. I can't hear enough. So
I love it.
thank you so much for coming on the Joy of Cruising podcast. Continued all the best to you. And as I like to say, we'll see you on the ocean.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
The Joy of Cruising and Cruising Interrupted, each $16.99 plus shipping, and new release, The Joy of Cruising Again for $18.99 can be ordered at the link on thejoyofcruisingpodcast.com. For each of the 3 books, use the discount code Joy of Cruising Podcast and get $4 off. The Joy of Cruising books are also available at Amazon. Order the ebook at Amazon or your favorite online retailer. Stay in touch by joining the Joy of Cruising Podcast Facebook group or following the Joy of Cruising Podcast on Instagram. We're constantly adding new shows. Please leave a review and tell a friend about us. We hope you enjoyed this brief escape to the ocean. See you next week.